The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. Introducing Sine Institute 2022 Fellow Mustafa Santiago Ali.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you back as we continue this journey on the fight for environmental justice and climate justice in the 21st century. You know, at our first seminar, we were incredibly blessed that we started out by unpacking systemic racism and the impacts on vulnerable communities. And today, we're moving forward with our second one, honoring Mother Earth, natural solutions to address the climate crisis. And we wouldn't be able to achieve the amazing work that's happened so far without our amazing set of Sine student associates. You see their names there: Will Desmond, Robert Roseman, who have helped us with this particular event that we're doing today, but also the rest of the team: Amaya Jones, Benjamin Robb, Julieta Marino, Matthew Zito, and of course, you know, my right hand, Christina Barnes, who have made this the amazing journey that it has been so far. As we've been able to unpack how we got here, what have been a number of the different types of challenges that folks have focused on, have been dealing with, but also, you know, the amazing sets of solutions and the individuals who are doing that every day. And today we are incredibly blessed that we have two amazing, not just thought leaders, but also folks who are connected to the work that's happening on the ground in politics and also, you know, leading the change that is happening every day across our country. We have our first individual who will be joining us, Ms. Savi Horne. I have known her for a number of years. She is a transformational figure, and she is just an amazing human being. She is also the executive director of the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers Land Loss Prevention Project. Savi completed 6 years of service on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Many of you have seen that in the news recently for it being elevated and strengthened. She also serves on the boards of the National Family Farm Coalition and the Rural Coalition. Savi is a member of the Coordinating Council of Black Land and Power Coalition and the leadership team of the National Black Food Justice Alliance. I could sit here all day and give accolades to everything that Savi has done and continues to do, but we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of this just historic moment to be able to listen and learn from you, Savi, about a number of different items. So now that I have made you blush, I want to dive in. Savi, I want to start with the first principle of environmental justice, which speaks to honoring Mother Earth. I'd like for you to sort of unpack what that means to you in relationship to the work that you have been doing for decades now.
Well, I just want to thank you, Mustafa, for inviting me, and for all who joined the call, and for managing the run through. And I have no rhyme or reason why the city of Durham has decided to cut shrubs and making a lot of noise. So, and putting more pollutants out in the environment. So I'm sorry for the background noise, but I can't mute them out. So yeah, you know, Mustafa, like you and a lot of folk in the EJ movement, we really, most of us grew up in urban setting and had cut our teeth in various ways with EJ. It could be, in my case, in the early years in high school, being part of demonstration against building of nuclear power point at Indian Point and engaging in civil unrest. Of course, my parents didn't know all of this. And then being the subject of an experiment in my formative years without parental consent of drinking radioactive water and tracing it through my esophagus, and never knew what happened, but it happened. And so we've soldiered on. So I feel the EJ movement represents all that comes together in terms of our work around climate justice, land rights, food justice. It really is an umbrella for so many things that defines where we are today on the planet, and as people of color, BIPOC people, Black people, immigrants, how we sit within the spaces that where we live, where we work, where we play. It means everything.
Most definitely. The Savi, thankfully there's a much stronger focus now on natural solutions to address the climate crisis. And we know many of those natural solutions are built into our history, Black and brown history. Can you talk a little bit about what natural solutions looks like to you in the work that you do and the advocacy that you've done?
Well, I really thank you for that question, because there's no need for reinvention here. Black folk, farmers particularly, because that is my perspective. We're a nonprofit ag law firm, been doing this for close to 40 years, right here in the bold city of Durham. And so for us, Black agrarianism, was rooted in our past experience of slavery and post-slavery and survival. And so it was just, the economics of post-slavery meant that we had to use the land in a particular deep, caring, and respectful way so that we could feed families. So the concept of that we now hear about the sustainable agriculture are not foreign. At Tuskegee, George Washington Carver was already rerouting those principles in his work with rural communities. So Booker T. Whatley, all coming out of Tuskegee. So sustainable use of the environment, of the land, is really grounded and rooted in our experience coming out of slavery and how we survive in the post-slavery environment and feed our family and be protective of our community. It all came together.
Let's talk a little bit about food justice.
Right.
We've got, I think the last number I saw before the pandemic, we have about 25 million people in our country who are food insecure. And we know that the work that you've been doing to help Black farmers to, protect their land, to re-garner land, all of that is important as we look at food insecurity and sets of opportunities moving forward. Could you take us a little deeper on the work that you are focused on and how that plays a significant role as we deal also with the climate crisis?
Well, again, food security does go back to environmental justice. because how we grow the food, how we treat the environment, who is living next door, what the production system is, ultimately will determine the health of a community. But food security gets at a very, insecurity get at a very food rights space, is dealing really more with looking at systemic racism and how that impacts the kinds of food that we eat in our community and our health. And so all the structural racism that we find in terms of the economy, we definitely saw that in the COVID period, where even as Black farmers didn't have that scale of production or even able to move produce in communities as they would have wanted to, they were able to go back to the natural ecosystem network that they have within their community. It was not a, okay, let's look at the value chain and all this production chain alignment. They were already aligned within their local communities. They knew what to do. They knew how to grow the food. And at the end of the day, got food to families. Whereas the billions that were spent in the COVID aid really benefited white farmers, a substantial amount of them, to the disadvantage of people of color farmers. And so our own reliance on the system that of production that we now know as sustainable production, really was the value that got us through being able to meet the food requirements in community and get us to really at a place of the right to food, the right to appropriate food, culturally appropriate food, food that is nourishing to our bodies and reconnect us to our ancestral roots. And I think for me, those values of the food rights movement are deeply, deeply rooted in the Black agrarian expression in this country, which sort of really feeds into how do we repair, and into the larger reparations question when it comes to food rights.
Most definitely. Savi, you touched on, some of the hurdles or barriers.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the additional ones that folks are facing, and how do we help folks to have some tangible steps to be able to address some of the, injustices that have happened in the past and currently here in this day?
Well, what we did see quite clearly in the COVID period is that the insufficient funding of community healthcare system really, really impacted our local community. So coming out of the Depression and all the recessions that, Black folk have experienced, and the economic oppression of not being able to have livable wages fed into their inability to get to the proper medical resources, having the transportation linkage, having access to broadband and information so they can read online and research, really did impact our responses to COVID. So I really feel that when you look at the infrastructure within our communities, it was really impacted by access to resources, medical resources, economic resources. So unless things fundamentally realign itself within our community and meet our demands for these more localized systems, we'll continue to have those problems, but we're not having it. We're saying as communities that we're going to turn this around, we're going to make demands, because we're able, we see from COVID that once we come together as a community, using our local institutions, our churches, our political power, that we were able to get resources in alignment with the local folk in our community who can grow the food, get monies for outreach on the vaccine, dealing with the massive, I believe, right-wing attack on the right to the vaccines and overcoming that, and then dealing with our own issues of being experiment and of science. But then looking at the hard numbers, when we look at in our communities, we knew who were dying, and we knew that we had to step up in a way to be protective and get vaccinated, and then do the outreach to reach others, and then look at the food system. It was just, everything came together all at once. And then we have to look at the lingering effect of environmental racism and how that led to our body condition that made us less than resilient in this milieu. It wasn't because we are not resilient. It's just that the whole attack on our bodies that has been sustained over the last 30, 50 years came together in fighting through this pandemic.
Well, Savi, we have some questions that are coming in from folks who are watching. And I also know Robert is going to also be asking you a question. So I'm about to bring Robert forward. But before that, I wanted to also touch on a point that I know that you've been very focused on. We're going to have thousands of young people who are going to watch this. Could you talk a little bit about all these amazing young leaders who are operating, in the food space?
Oh my God. Oh, thank you for asking that question, because they really are amazing. This next generation of food rights activists and environmental justice, they're unabashedly African in their perspective. They understand the journeys of their ancestors, and they are not taking no for an answer. They believe in grounding local solutions and putting in the kind of energy that they need to grow the food and to build a community infrastructure. So much of what I see in the movement just even go beyond just dealing with older generation of Black farmers, but this next generation is sitting firmly on their work, but looking at, well, how do we then make the type of infrastructure changes that would make it sustainable? How do we gain access to land? How do we collectivize our resources to make a difference? How do we move away from notions of this market economy, of just owning land within our own family, but how do we then collectivize the process so that we can grow more food and share the resources and the benefits for our community? So there really are an amazing, this is the beautiful generation that we have been waiting for. They're here, they're doing a lot of work, there are thought leaders, and working with them has been one of the most amazing experience of my life. So I thank you, and I've also met some amazing students from American University in terms of activism and willing to put in the work and the time in communities and ground themselves in the community. Community is not an object of study.
Without a doubt. I often say that folks have both their hands in the soil, and they're
That's
all
right.
helping to lead on policy on the state and federal level as well.
That's right.
Robert, I want to pull you into the conversation and allow you to ask the question that you wanted to pose.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this conversation that we've been able to have today, and will continue to have. And the first question I want to ask is, was in the chat and from the audience: is there a relationship between Black land loss and the issues around climate change, particularly sea level rise and climate gentrification?
Yes, I absolutely see a through line between climate change and Black land loss. Because of how African Americans have been holding land and heirs property, they have not been able to access government programs to make the type of structural improvement on the land to benefit the environment. What they have done was, within their own ecosystem, is to keep things moving along. But the white farmers traditionally have had access to conservation programs that these farmers were denied. Black farmers, by their use, sustainable use of woodlands and forest land, are now sitting in a good place of being able to sequester carbon and build the economics within their families. So we, without much in terms of government intervention to support us, have held together ecosystems within our communities that in the end will help us to get through the type of climate change that's being envisioned. So just amazing. Just think about if we were getting the conservation services, which I think we're going to be able to once we are able to get heirs property producers into these programs, and the kind of money that's being dedicated to helping farmers in terms of agriculture, I think we will see a huge sea change within rural communities, anchored by Black and BIPOC farmers, for sure.
Robert, if you don't mind, I'll take the next question. Savi, we have a number of international students who are also a part of the work that's going on and are interested. And how do we build bridges between communities in this country and other countries to better lift up natural solutions and to be able to share lessons learned?
Well, so from my work in the land rights space, so much learning and thinking and doing have come from my reaction and interaction with students from the South, students from the Caribbean, Latin America, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islanders, South Pacific, all those students who have more traditional land ownership and traditional knowledge of agriculture, being able to share the knowledge space in the commons, not own it, but sharing it freely, I think have made a difference in terms of my own thinking, but in terms of their deep sharing when they are working with communities here, so that communities can understand. This is like, we have been doing this in the same manner that you have been doing this. And we are here in a different way as thought partners, as somebody to help in processes, not to do any top-down analysis on what you're doing, but to just share the commons of our knowledge with you. I think that has made a big change.
And then we have another question that just came in from Patrice. She says, can you give examples of government programs that excluded Black farmers? And maybe another way of also addressing that is, are there programs in the federal government that you would like to see do a better job of supporting Black farmers? So either way you want to get at that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily want to attack the question or answer the question from an exclusion, because then that becomes a disempowering analysis that there must be something at fault with the farmer why you couldn't get in the program. So for me, from an empowered place, I feel that Black farmers, through the multiple lawsuits, through the studies of Congress, et cetera, have looked realistically at some of the barriers and have identified access to capital as a major barrier, program access as a major barrier. And so now we're at a place where we're going to begin to look systemically at how to make the leap, the improvement, and how to institutionalize them and how to engage communities in remaking this process. Really humanize the USDA programs from our perspective. So I feel that with more access points that there will be greater share in the resources that communities are demanding. This is now a demand. We're not like, it's not hand to mouth. We're not asking, we're demanding our fair share of resources to benefit our communities.
Most definitely. Well, Savi, I want to honor our time together, and I promised you if we got 27 minutes, we would be happy. So I'm going to ask for 30 more seconds.
All right. Is there another question I can?
No question, but
I just want, Mustafa, after, you get moving and just to share what we have learned over the course of our careers and being in movements on land and EJ issues. It's like there's not enough time. So I just want to honor it and commit that should students have more questions, we can maybe just do a little coffee thing. When I jet up to DC for something, maybe just sit around and meet and talk. I commit to doing that. For those with questions that may not have gotten answered or they need more information, I'll be more than happy. And I continue to urge AU students to continue their level of learning and activism and understand that they have to remake the world which they want to live in. It's not going to drop in your hand. We can't get up to Mars. We don't have stock in Microsoft to get up, or even Amazon to shoot up there, or Bronson. This is our planet home. This is our commitment to make it sustainable, to make it livable, and to have a just food system and economic system and racial justice within your lifetime. It must happen.
There it is. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
So thank you all.
Yes, the amazing Savi Horne with a chart.
And thank you, Mustafa, for the amazing work that you're doing with wildlife and integrating not just the EJ movement, but also the sustainability of animals and wildlife and flora and fauna into this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You continue to be blessed, and we will talk soon.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
All right, everyone. That was Miss Savi Horne. Huge amounts of just amazing information, but it doesn't stop there. Because now I get to invite my friend and colleague into the conversation, Colin Omara. He serves as the president of the National Wildlife Federation. It's the largest organization, wildlife organization, conservation organization in the country, 52 states and territorials, and nearly 6 million hunters, anglers, birders, gardeners, hikers, paddlers, wildlife enthusiasts. Colin, you got everybody covered. Colin also, under his leadership, is creating a 21st century organization at the National Wildlife Federation. The accolades, once again, for Colin are long, both on the educational side and his work in Delaware, his work in helping to frame out legislation at the highest levels in our country and in states across our country. So we are incredibly blessed to be able to hold space with you. So Colin, I want to bring you into the conversation the same way we brought Savi in. The first principle of environmental justice is honoring Mother Earth. What does that mean to you? How does that play out for you?
Yeah, no, it's great to be with you, and it's great to be with all the students, and I'm grateful for the Institute for the opportunity and your wisdom in having Mustafa be one of the fellows this year. For me, the first principle of environmental justice says it all. And a lot of folks talk about the sacredness of Mother Earth, part of that statement, but I often think about the second phrase, which talks about the interconnectedness of all species and that kind of ecological unity. And, it's easy. We're in the Anthropocene. We kind of see ourselves as kind of trying to dominate nature in a lot of ways. But, when Mother Earth speaks, we all have to listen. And, it's the clean air, it's the clean water, it's the healthy soils that we depend on as a species ourselves. And we're living in the midst of a, sixth grade extinction, where we're seeing the just rapid acceleration of species declines to the point where extinction is a realistic concern for about 1/3 of all species. And so, for me, it's not just about honoring the earth, but actually recognizing the interconnectedness that we all have. And look, when folks talk about climate, when folks talk about a lot of environmental problems, we often talk about technology solutions. And today, and under Mustafa's leadership, we want to make sure there's more opportunities to talk about those natural solutions to complement, not in competition, but to complement, because we need that, that ecological unity that's in that first principle.
Without a doubt. Colin, a lot of folks may not be as familiar with natural solutions. When we talk about infrastructure, folks automatically think about bridges and roads and those types of things. Can you talk a little bit about what natural solutions, natural infrastructure looks like to you, and how it can actually help our country to be stronger and better?
Sure. I mean, I'll start with a story. And one of my first, kind of major climate disasters that I lived through was Hurricane Sandy, one of the most powerful hurricanes to come up the East Coast, like high up the East Coast, in generations. And, one of the lessons that I saw was that the communities that had healthy wetlands, communities that had healthy dunes, communities that had protected their natural resources fared a lot better. Now, at the time, this is 2012, like not a lot of folks thought of that as quote unquote infrastructure. But we saw a lot of a lot of man-made systems like seawalls in New Jersey, and some stormwater systems all get just overrun or break down, or just really not be able to handle the power of that storm. Where the natural systems were incredibly resilient. Wetland, an acre of wetland can hold between 300,000 and 1 million gallons of water. If you pave that over, kind of turn paradise into a parking lot, as the song goes. All of a sudden that water goes somewhere else, right? It goes in the basement next door. It washes out. It washes out the development that was there. And so thinking through all the different functions, and so and I won't go through all of them, because I mean most of your students know this, but wetlands are amazing because they not only hold a lot of water, they make water cleaner. They pull up a lot of nutrients, they pull up a lot of pollution. So the result is cleaner water for all of us. Things like oysters and mussels and shellfish that actually will actually eat pollution kind of as part of their diet and kind of put out cleaner sources of water. Kind of providing this purification benefit. When we have healthier forests, they're less likely to have these massive mega fires. They help reduce drought conditions. And so thinking about how we can restore nature as a way to both make our communities more resilient to extreme weather events, but also just be healthier. I mean, communities that have a lot of trees, we have an urban tree desert in a lot of places where you don't have the urban canopy, they don't have the tree canopy in lower income communities of color that we have other places. Like that's a health issue, because those trees provide clean oxygen, they reduce pollution, they reduce the temperatures and making things cooler, in addition to providing good habitat for critters. And it's all thinking about how we use all the tools in our toolkit to make communities healthier and more resilient, more vibrant.
I want to pass the mic, and I want to bring Robert back into our conversation, because we have some questions that are coming in. So Robert, let me pass the mic to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So we have a question from Benjamin who says, we are currently speaking from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. D.C. has been named the top public park system in the United States by the Trust for Public Lands. How can we appropriately utilize these natural resources and continue to care for the resources that are so close to home?
Benjamin, I appreciate the question, and Robert too. I'm coming from Delaware right now, so I actually think our parks are the best in the country. And I'll put Cape Henlopen and a few others against Rock Creek Park any day. But look, I mean, I think I think there's two pieces, right? One is making sure that we are doing the kind of the restoration work and investing in these systems. I mean, like we see a lot more investment in Rock Creek Park than we do, on the other side of the city, like Oxbow Creek and other places, that are in lower income neighborhoods. I think, making sure that that access is equitable. I want to make sure that, it's not just the folks that are over by AU or, folks out in Georgetown that have access to some of these great resources, but every single ward across the entire city. And also just making sure they're a priority for funding. There's going to be a lot of federal funding this cycle to improve, resilience. One of the things that Mustafa and I spend a lot of time working on is making sure that folks are thinking about how to make cities more resilient. That we don't think of nature just as something that's far away, but it can be close to home too. And so restoring wetlands, restoring some of the some places that became almost like landfills over time, cleaning that up, creating new green spaces, having more green spaces where maybe things have been torn down over the years, remediating brownfields, creating close to home places for nature. So every kid in DC, whether they no matter what their zip code is, they can get to a safe open space to play and have healthy experiences really close to their house, close to their apartment.
Robert, I believe you got another question there. Folks are anxious to ask questions to Colin, so let me let you go ahead and pose that next question.
I do have another question. The question comes from Dr. Hollis. Is one answer to ensure that people with traditional ecological knowledge are leading the work in natural infrastructure activities?
No, thank you, Dr. Hollis. I think we should have you on the screen, given your amazing expertise and leadership. I'm a huge fan of Adrian's. One of the greatest failings of white-led conservation over the last 200 years in this country has been a erasure of traditional ecological and environmental knowledge, especially by indigenous communities. I'll just tell another story. There was a fight last year in the U.S. Congress about having the Salish and Kootenai tribes out in Montana have the authority to manage the buffalo range. It's a wildlife refuge. It has kind of a great bison herd on it. And there was a fight on this for 20 years. And the concern was that the tribe wouldn't have the capacity, wouldn't have the knowledge to manage this herd, well. And I was talking to the director at the time, who was an opponent of the change. And I said, look, when the Salish and Kootenai and the Shoshone and the Arapaho and others were managing wildlife, kind of wild bison herds, we had 20 to 30 million bison on the landscape. When white folks came into the picture, all of a sudden we almost extirpated all of them within like 50 years. And so the idea that there isn't a kind of amazing knowledge that should be honored, that should be centered, that should be guiding a lot of our ecological restoration work and our wildlife management work. It's just arrogance of white folks who don't have appreciation for the history and the knowledge, and also respecting the proprietariness of some of that knowledge, and then making sure that we're not kind of extracting the knowledge without honoring and resourcing the communities to do the work themselves, instead of kind of stealing the knowledge without really resourcing communities that have been disinvested and underinvested in for generations now.
Colin, let's go to Capitol Hill, because we understand that solutions both have to come from the front lines, and they also have to come from the highest levels of our government, and whether on the federal or the state level. And our students do a lot of research. So they noticed some of your testimony a few months ago, back in December of 2021, when you testified in front of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee in support of Recovering America's Wildlife Act. First of all, why is this bill so important, and why, should it be passed?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. We have done a really good job in this country at saving the species we hunt and fish. We had a program that was created in 1937 called Pittman-Robertson, the kind of the Wildlife Restoration Act, that it takes some excise tax and puts them specifically toward larger mammals and waterfowl conservation. In 1952, there's another bill that focused on sport fish. So we spent a lot of money bringing back trout and different types of kind of game fish. Yet the full diversity of wildlife, when you think about pollinators, you think about things like green sea turtles in the Gulf, you think about sage grouse out west, or you think about orca populations, or in the Pacific Northwest, or salmon runs, or you think about manatees in the Southeast. We've invested very little, shockingly little, and it's places where we've been very surgical, like trying to restore bald eagle populations, for example, like places where trying to bring back the Louisiana brown bear, or the brown pelican, or the American alligator. But those stories are kind of few and far between. There's 12,000 species right now that are in trouble just in the 50 states and territories. Yet we've never really resourced their investment. And there's an incredible bipartisan effort right now to try to address this historical inequity, to try to save species before they're on the brink of collapse. I've mentioned before the sixth extinction. This is our opportunity to do things through collaboration and innovation, incorporating that local, that tribal knowledge, that traditional knowledge. Trying to make sure that we really have folks that are close to the land working on solutions as a way to recover species before the only options that are left are regulating and litigating through the Endangered Species Act, which of course there's a place for, but it's a heck of a lot, just like healthcare, right? It's a heck of a lot easier to do that little preventative medicine before you wind up in the emergency room. One of the most exciting parts of this title, though, getting back to Dr. Hollis's question, is that for the first time, the tribal nations will be fully resourced to do this work. $100 million a year. They were not part of those two other acts I mentioned. They were actually systemically excluded from being eligible for those other funds. And so this would be an opportunity for the more than 100 million acres that are stewarded by our indigenous brothers and sisters to actually have resources to try to restore populations. And so it's a bill that's going to do amazingly ecologically, but also begin to address some of the historical inequities that have really been all over in wildlife conservation.
Robert, I know you're going to have another question here in one moment, but Colin, Folks may not be as aware about 30 by 30, America the Beautiful. Maybe you could share a little bit about why that's important and how we're all connected to it.
Yeah, so there's been this kind of concept, and many of you have probably read some of the work of E.O. Wilson. There's this idea of trying to try to set aside half of the planet for nature, trying to restore the natural systems that we've degraded in so many parts of the terrestrial lands around the globe. In the U.S. context, we're trying to basically say that we've degraded a lot of lands. There's been a lot of development. We've built 4 million miles of roads, which is enough to get to the moon and back, I don't know, hundreds of times. And yet every one of those, right, is fragmenting habitat, disconnecting, populations of different species, just destroying the basic habitat. And again, some of that's the cost of progress. Very little of it was done with thinking about how we kind of reconnect and restore the lands to the best of our ability to meet kind of multiple objectives. And so the goal of America the Beautiful, which is an initiative launched by the president a few months ago, is to try to conserve and restore 30% of the lands and 30% of the waters across this country. And it's going to be an investment-led strategy, but the idea of, we're losing grasslands in this country, faster than we're losing rainforest in the Amazon right now. I mean, because we're moving more and more of the prairies for food production or fuel production, in a lot of cases with biofuels or ethanol. And so really trying to have investment from both the bipartisan infrastructure package as well as the Build Back Better bill, which will probably be called something else, the reconciliation package, but investing those dollars into restoration, which both achieves the ecological outcomes that we just talked about in saving species, but also makes communities more resilient, to Mustafa's first question. And so it's a great kind of win-win-win, and you put a ton of folks to work if we can put that together with a civilian climate corps. Talk about hiring millions of young folks over years to do the work and making sure we address some of the historical inequities that were so prevalent in the Roosevelt era CCC, making sure that opportunity is equitable, making sure folks are paid well, and making sure that those are opportunities for everybody. But that there's about $110 billion of proposed investments in restoration and resilience in the reconciliation negotiations right now, and that'd be able to do work all across the country, from forests in the southeast to wetlands in the mid-Atlantic to grasslands, or even doing work in the sagebrush steppe out west and in some of the desert basins. And so it'd be a game changer. But again, trying to bring people together, do big things on the landscape, and convince folks it's not just good for critters, it's good for all of us. It's going to make us all healthier and more vital.
Robert, let me pass the mic to you.
Thank you. And we have another question here that says, how do you prevent state and national parks from being overused, especially since their budgets are not sufficient for upkeep? For example, local parks in Northern Virginia along the Potomac River have been seeing a decline in sustainability, with more foot traffic due to the pandemic forcing more people to get outside. For instance, the Great Falls Park, Riverbend Park, Scotts Run Nature Preserve, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit of an outlier on this. I mean, I of course agree that we are seeing some level of environmental degradation, but I'm so excited that so many folks during the pandemic, turned the tragedy that it was on so many levels into an opportunity to reconnect with nature. And, and I think, we need to make sure the outdoor space is safe for everyone. We got to make sure it's equitable, but I also think we got to be careful in language that, and I'm not saying this in the case of this particular question, but just saying, this is like space that's, this is for us, not for them. And this is space that's, should be used by traditional users. I do see this in different places. I see folks in local communities saying, oh, we don't want folks from the other neighborhoods, coming in. We don't want folks, we don't want younger folks, or we don't want folks of color, or we don't want, folks from the city, coming into these, these urban or these rural, some of these rural spaces. I mean, for me, the answer is we need more, right? We need more access to nature. We need more equitable opportunities. But, I mean, I never want to turn away a family that wants to spend time in nature, right? And again, I think we have to be very careful about, keeping folks on trails, making sure that folks are, respecting the ecological integrity of places, and making sure folks aren't kind of freelancing or mountain bikes or all the kind of stuff we hear about. And I think we also got to center safety. We got to recognize in a real way that, for a lot of folks, being outdoors is not a safe space. They're afraid of their own safety. A lot of the ways that we have set up our systems have not, kind of centered safety, and that could be, folks of color, that could be women, that could be, in different contexts. But if we are going to try to push more folks to enjoy the outdoors because it's good for your health, it's good for, I often say, look, if I can give you a dissertation on all the research you care about nature, but that will never match, the wonders that you will see by just spending time in nature yourself, right? I mean, it's great to read books, and God knows we've all read a lot of them. but having the experience outdoors, there's nothing better. But I want to make sure that access is equitable for everybody, and we're also protecting the ecological integrity of these places.
Colin, and as you were sharing information, there are some things that continue to connect with me, and I think for most folks, they sometimes don't see the connection between environmental justice and the work that happens in the conservation space or a number of other areas. And I'm often reminded, you may remember about 2 years ago, there was a study that came out talking about our national parks. I think there was close to 90% of them are now being impacted from air pollution and the climate crisis. And sometimes folks don't make that connection of where that air pollution is coming from. And of course, Black and brown communities have been overburdened on the transportation side and also with all the facilities that are often placed in our communities. Can you talk about your vision or also the sets of work that you are helping to move forward, both inside of NWF and beyond, about strengthening that connection for folks?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mustafa. And frankly, thank you for your leadership and kind of teaching me so much. I mean, I think there's been these artificial divisions, right? Conservation means, these rural landscapes. It means, kind of even in some cases, landscapes divorced from people. Not traditionally, thinking about ancestral rights, lands that were stolen, lands that were, where folks were forcibly moved off them, traditional uses of land, and that, kind of environmental issues were, more direct pollution. This is like, power plants and air pollution and water pollution and soil contamination, as opposed to saying like it's all part of the same system, right? I mean, this gets back to principle one, right? This kind of interconnected ecology. And I think, my vision is that we kind of break down these divisions that I think are artificial. I often use the analogy of like the canary in the coal mine, right? Which is like, if the air is bad for people, it's also bad for critters. If you care about having healthy populations of critters, you should care about clean air. If you care about healthy populations of people, you should care about clean air. Like, I'm less concerned about why people are at the table. I think it's important to understand the interconnectedness of this. But, I would argue that when you're centering, when you're sending other things over, people's health and their ability to live, there's a disconnect somewhere, right? There's a dehumanization, there's a problem there. And also recognizing that there's a lot of education that's necessary. I mean, I'll just be real with folks, because Mustafa's taught me to kind of believe in real talk. Now, the environmental movement has been fairly white, upper middle income, even upper income, folks for a long time that aren't living in sacrifice zones, that aren't living close to, the power plant or the facility that isn't, meeting their pollution standards. They're not living next to the Superfund site or the, having the other things. And so there's this disconnect between folks that are often in decision-making roles with the lived experience of folks that are suffering the consequences and the injustices. And so one of the things that we're trying to do at the National Wildlife Federation is become a 21st century organization. It's not just speak to those issues, let folks speak for themselves. I mean, we're incredibly privileged at the Federation. I mean, if I need to talk to the president, even, we can have access. But it's one thing for me to say something, but frankly, us being able to create opportunities for folks to speak for themselves, to really kind of live the Hermes principles, making sure that there are voices that have always been marginalized. I mean, I'm privileged to testify a lot on the Hill, but I'm often always asking the question, like, okay, what about bringing this person? What about having this person, speak for themselves? Chairman Grijalva, who's another great Torxel you should keep on your radar, has probably done a better job of this than probably anybody else in the U.S. Congress, making sure communities can kind of speak for themselves. He's one of the big authors of the Environmental Justice for All Act and so many other kind of climate bills and a lot of the wildlife stuff that we work on. But I do think that it's much more connected, and we've allowed kind of the culture wars and some of the partisanship, because I mean, again, just be real, right? I mean, a lot of sportsman groups tend to lean a little more Republican, a lot of environmental justice groups tend to lean a little more Democratic, and allowed, issues to divide us where frankly, we are stronger together. And because of that division, we don't see the kind of sustained progress that we need. And so like my arguments are, if you keep trying the same thing, you're getting, get the same outcome, kind of the definition of insanity. Like, we got to mix it up. And the way to mix it up is be much more inclusive, much more equitable. But that gets back to what Savi was talking about, is like, you got to be grounded in the community. You got to have real conversations. You can't be assuming you know better, and you got to be listening. You got to be willing to, take a step back, kind of, and learn to like allow yourself to be, to authentically engage in a way that I think is hard for folks, because, we've kind of forgotten how to listen as a country and how to learn from each other. And but when you do that well, and that's what we're trying to do with the Federation, the power that you build and the change you can create is just, it's unbelievable.
Robert, let me pass the mic back to you, because I believe you have another question for Colin.
That's good. Thank you. And the question we have now is kind of like in the more concrete example of what you were just mentioning, but how is National Wildlife Federation ensuring, and how do you suggest that other nonprofit organizations create a space that diverse voices feel comfortable joining and sharing their experiences?
Yeah, and again, I mean, that's just where Mustafa's leadership has been remarkable. There's also a woman named Shante Coleman that works on our team, was just an absolute rock star who I'd encourage everyone to look up, because anything she's written you should read, because it's brilliant. Like, I mean, these organizations need to look like America, and it's not just in the not just in numbers, but in terms of like leadership, in terms of every level. And I think there was an effort several years ago where folks said, the movement's too white, we need to hire a bunch of folks. And basically, if there was a failure to actually change the culture to create more equitable decision making, more equitable resource allocation, making sure that that you were becoming a 21st century organization in practice, not just in numbers. And there's more to folks, and I just think there's been some tokenization, there's been harm that was created by some of those efforts. And if you don't have a space where folks can be their authentic self, right, and be able to come in and not have fear of aggressions or different forms of harm, having kind of racist actions that are incredibly painful and harmful being repeated. And again, the Federation still has a way to go, but we're actively talking about these issues. I mean, actively working on them, having Mustafa's leading a huge part of the organization at this point. And I think it just makes a difference. I mean, they can't be white-led organizations, right? I mean, they should be kind of plurality, kind of multi. They should represent the diaspora, right? I mean, it should represent the full diversity of the country. And I think it's also about being honest about resources. And this is a harder conversation, but the bigger groups do suck up a lot of resources. And so how you authentically either redirect some of those resources or create space for others to have the resources, because it's not a lack of talent, it's not a lack of knowledge, it's not a lack of anything other than often capacity, resources, and time. And I think we try to authentically partner in so much of our work and just lift up more voices and make sure they're in the conversation. But we got a ways to go. I mean, there was a lot of damage by the movement over the past century that and I think things are moving in the right direction. But we got to move faster, because if we don't, the consequences of failure are just unfathomable.
Talking about moving forward, we got a great question that came in. There was one statement of yours that really stuck with me, which was, just as we need a whole of government approach to solve the climate and biodiversity crisis, we will need all of Congress. Given how divided our nation is, what are the climate activists doing to get everyone on board? And if climate activists aren't doing enough, or nonprofits, what do you think we have to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've been so inspired by the leadership of young folks across the country just demanding climate action. I mean, I still think there are systemic challenges that we're facing. Some of which related to voting rights, some of it related to the role of money in politics. But we got to keep going, right? I mean, this isn't like one of those. This isn't something you can kind of do for a little bit. I mean, we're literally in a fight for existence right now. And it's a generational fight. This isn't a single piece of legislation. I mean, this is, I don't know, use a football analogy, but it's kind of grinding it out, right? There's sometimes you're going to throw that long touchdown pass, but you got to kind of grind it out acre or yard by yard. And I think the biggest thing is we just got to believe. I do worry about kind of climate anxiety and the kind of the psychological depression that can come from when you really think about how severe how terrifying some of the different future options are unless we kind of get our act together. But I also kind of channel President Obama, if not us, who, right? We're the ones we've been waiting for. And I just think we got to leave it all. I don't want to know sports mode. Maybe we've got to coach my daughter later, but we got to kind of leave it all on the field. And I don't know what's going to happen in the fall with the midterms. I don't know what's going to happen with the presidential election in 2024. The science doesn't care, right? The planet doesn't. I mean, things are moving right now. We have to act. We have to act at scale. We got to act in a way that's connected, that's centering both our equity work as well as our reducing pollution and restoring natural systems and kind of all the different climate solutions in smart ways. But again, failure is just not an option. And so it's one of those things we just got to keep at it. And if that means spending a bunch of time in West Virginia, that means we spend a bunch of time in West Virginia. If it means, we got to be outside the White House or inside the White House or all the above, that's what we got to do. But, like this is the most important thing that most of us will ever have the privilege of working on. And so current and future generations are depending on us succeeding.
So some of the students have asked the question, what should academic institutions be doing better? And then the second part to that question is, beyond the academic walls, what additional things would you like to see young people doing in this moment?
Yeah, and I was fortunate to attend some really nice schools over the years, and I think we got to stop assuming that this is simply a battle of knowledge and science. It's a challenge of kind of how do we move government institutions, how do we move massive populations. I mean, in some ways, I do think that the technological revolution over the last several decades has created all kinds of opportunities for access to knowledge and platforms, things like that. But they've also been incredibly destructive in some ways in terms of the worst forces of society, having an amplified platform and connecting things. Like, we've kind of forgotten the basics, right? I mean, like, it's great to be on Twitter, complaining about whatever, but like, we got to show up, right? We got to be physically there. No, I'm not a huge fan of the word slacktivist, but I mean, I think there's a need to like still be present, right? I mean, like the phone call, the being at a town hall meeting, like showing up in somebody's office. And so I would just, I mean, it's a little more, there's a little more discomfort doing it that way. I mean, it's easier to kind of, fire off like the email or, the tweet or the Facebook post or, I don't know, TikTok rant or whatever, but like, like we got to show up and we got to show up in numbers. And the thing that you have to know is that, and I think most folks do know, is this: the folks that want to preserve the status quo, folks that are benefiting from the status quo, are in those spaces, right? They're in the rooms, they're making the donations. And so, the money's never going to be equal, right? But like the people and kind of the numbers are on our side. And so I just think, I would just encourage folks to get out. And that's why I'm so excited that, that you were offered a fellowship this year, as well as, some of your fellows that I just think are rock star change makers in the community, like, Secretary Castro and Shannon and others that are on the list this year. I mean, I just think it's the application, right? I mean, like, we're past the point where we're not living in the era where like that one definitive study, right, is going to change so many hearts and minds that action happens tomorrow. I mean, we don't have the politics that I think 50 years ago, where you had, the ability to have kind of just sound science alone driving, good changes. Like, we got to be better than that, which means we got to show up in force, and we got to break out of our comfort zone, and being willing to, put ourselves on the line in a real way. And so I would just encourage folks, like, learn everything you can. I mean, like, AU is an amazing institution. I mean, the number of AU friends I have that graduated from American are just, that are doing amazing work. I mean, one of my favorite state senators in Delaware, my friend Sarah, just killing it. And she, had a great time at AU. But it's not enough to do it in the classroom. It's not enough to write that great paper. It's not enough to just, do that. We got to show up. And like, and I know y'all are close to DC, like, get involved in the Hill, get involved in nonprofits. If you want to be with us, let Mustafa know. Folks want to run for office, great. If folks want to just help repopulate the federal government that's been decimated over like, a generation now, like, I want folks to see service, whether that's in the public sector or the civic sector, as that noble calling, because we need you right now, right? We need you to want to serve. And so however that fits in, but just, we got to be in the arena. I guess I'll end with TR, right? We just got to be, you got to be in it, because observing from afar isn't getting it done right now.
Well, all right, there's the charge to everyone. Get engaged and do it in an authentic way. I want to thank our guests today, Ms. Savi Horne, Colin Omara. I also want to thank the amazing students who helped to put this together, Robert, Will, and Matthew. And I just want to remind folks that our next seminar will be focused on the power of culture and creatives. Our voices, our power. So you're going to get a chance to have some conversations with a number of actors and actresses and folks who are in the music world. And remember, in the words of my mother, you have power unless you give it away. So utilize it in the right way. See everybody soon.